Good afternoon, everybody. It is Thursday in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. My name is Adam Bittner, digital sports producer for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, back with Paul Zeise, our sports columnist, for our weekly Zeise is Right video chat with Paul. Paul, how are you?
I'm doing good. I'm just trying to get this camera here situated. There we go. I every time I move around, I hit something and there's a button somewhere. But I think we're good now. Go ahead.
Yeah, we are. We're good, and we're going to talk a little bit about some Steelers camp battles, Paul. The Ray Fittipaldo was asked in his chat this week, our Steelers beat reporter, what his top camp battles are as we look toward training camp for the Steelers. He named a few, and then I want to go through those with you, and then maybe some that you're looking forward to. The first was Dan Moore versus Chuks Okorafor and Broderick Jones for who are going to be the two tackles for this team. Is Broderick Jones going to be the starter from day one, given that the team traded up and used their number one draft pick on him, or are you going to lean more on that experience of Dan Moore and Chuks Okorafor in the early going? What do you think, Paul? When we get to game one, how do you see that battle unfolding up at training camp in Latrobe?
I would tell you, I think that Broderick Jones is going to be the guy. I mean, from day one, they didn't draft him. They didn't move up to get him. They didn't draft him not to be. You know what I'm saying? They didn't draft him because they think Dan Moore is their guy. And the thing about it is, if you're going to make a rookie your guy, doesn't it make sense to give him absolutely as many reps as you possibly can in spring in training camp? I mean, it only makes sense to do it that way. And I feel like Chuks Okorafor will be the right and Dan Moore will be the swing tackle. I mean, I think that's how it's going to shake out. And if it's going to shake out like that, to me, make it very simple. You take Broderick Jones and you put him there at the left tackle spot from day one, and you basically give him every single rep he can possibly take. Because one of the things that you always hear from linemen and line coaches is that continuity really is important and chemistry is really important. And as a result, I mean, you can't develop that with a guy if you're going to do this charade where you're going to make him play, the second team or the second, the twos or whatever, and get a few run, a little bit of run with the ones here and there because he's got to prove himself. And then, 3 games into the season, now we're going to, I just think you drafted him for a reason. And you put him there from day one until he proves he can't be there. I mean, that's the other part of it in my mind. That's the other part of it. When you look at that whole thing, I would tell you, it is important to make sure that you are really, really committed to finding out A, if he can play at that level, and B, if he can play at that level. Then by the time the season starts, you want to make sure he's actually ready to play at that level. Because Dan Moore's played before. I mean, Adam, ultimately, at 3 weeks into training camp, you say, boy, this Broderick Jones stinks. Then what? Well, you put Dan Moore back, and guess what? You really haven't lost that much from the standpoint of you've got a situation of where you have, an experienced guy who played last year that doesn't need training camp nearly as much as the guy you're trying to get ready. So, long-winded answer, I know, and I'm, but at the end of the day, Broderick Jones is your guy. You drafted him to be your guy. It really shouldn't be that big of a camp battle other than Broderick Jones proving that he's not good enough to play because he should have every opportunity to play.
Yeah, I think that's kind of where I am is you want to give him the opportunity so that, if everything works out the way the Steelers have clearly planned for it to, you're ready. And so in that sense, I guess the battle should be over until you're right. If he struggles in training camp and you get 2 weeks in and you're not seeing improvement, then maybe you make it more of a true battle and say, who's going to earn it between now and who's going to earn it in the preseason games, right? As opposed to just kind of giving Broderick Jones a scholarship.
Right. I mean, that's the thing. You want that battle to go on. And don't get me wrong. Nothing should be handed to him from the standpoint of, if he stinks, he stinks. If he's not able to do it, he's not able to do it, and he loses the job. But it should be his job to lose, as opposed to the other way around. Because I think with if you're going to go back, if you look at, the guy that played last year, Dan Moore, right? If he's going to take most of the snaps for the first 3 weeks of training camp, you've wasted the first 3 weeks of training camp if your long-term plan is to have Broderick Jones be the starter. And that's my point. To me, from day one, you got to get this kid as many reps as you possibly can. And not just reps, but reps with the guys he's probably going to be playing with. That's the whole point about it. Like, to me, if you think about it, he's going to be playing with the first group. He's going to be playing with that, whatever that first group is. And believe me, there, I think there are still some, questions at guard positions and everything else. So, but to me, the most important thing is you start on that left tackle, right, with your rookie. And, because Chuks Okorafor has a lot more experience playing the right tackle than Dan Moore, I would assume he's going to win that job. So, I don't think anybody should be handed a job, but in this case, you're giving a guy the maximum chance to win the job, but you're also giving him a chance to lose the job if he doesn't perform.
Paul, the second camp battle Ray Fittipaldo said he's interested in watching is Joey Porter Jr. versus Levi Wallace. My sense of that one, Paul, is not so much, is there going to be a winner and a loser, but what's the timeshare going to be? So let me ask you this in terms of, where do you want that timeshare to be in an ideal scenario to start the season and then maybe to end the season if you're, looking at Joey Porter Jr. as kind of the future corner? What percentage of the time do you want him to be that number 2 guy compared to Levi Wallace, understanding that they're both going to play? And I don't think there's anything that's going to change that, right?
Well, I mean, I think, there are some things you can do. I mean, Levi Wallace might be able to play some in the slot. I mean, they're still looking for that position, right? So at the end of the day, he could still play in the slot if he needs to. And the other part of it is that position is one where I think that the only way you get better, it's hard to simulate, is by playing. And so unlike left tackle where, you want the same guy, you want continuity and all that other stuff, you have the ability at corner maybe to start with Levi Wallace as your starter and let Joey Porter Jr., as he gets his feet wet and learns how to play a little bit more and gets comfortable playing in the NFL game and, starts to see, different offenses and different receivers and all the challenges that come with it. I would like it to be a situation where by mid-season, maybe Joey Porter's taking the majority of the snaps at corner, and then maybe even, later in the season, he is the guy. But to your point, both of those guys are going to have to play. And here's the other thing. They've been floating the idea that Patrick Peterson might be the guy who ends up playing some in the slot. So these two might actually end up being your starting guys, right? And then you go from the standpoint of Patrick Peterson playing in the slot some, and therefore all three of them just getting a whole lot of different, a whole lot of run, which is ideal. You want guys at corner to be able to be rested and refreshed and everything else in the fourth quarter, because that's generally when teams start throwing the ball around, especially when they're losing.
Yeah, I think that's the key. And how long what do you think Joey Porter can do in training camp to kind of flip that script, or maybe I should ask this in the preseason games? Could he exceed your expectations, and what do you think the likelihood of that is?
Well, absolutely. We've seen it before. We've seen, different times but that's a hard position to step right in as a rookie because of the way that passing games have advanced. But listen, if he's every single day absorbing whatever they're, telling him, right? If he's absorbing it and he's putting it to use and they're watching the practice film and they're saying, you know what, he's really advancing very fast, it could be a situation of by the end of training camp, he's the guy, and that's not really been, wouldn't be really that big of a surprise. But at the end of the day, I think the biggest thing with Joey Porter Jr. is he just has to show that he can be consistent in his position day after day after day after day after day after day, right? And then you get into the preseason games, he might only play a quarter or two. Well, guess what? Don't give up big plays in the preseason games. Make tackles when they're, the play comes your way or whatever, and it's your turn to make a tackle. I mean, those are things that are easily measurable in a game. But if you talk to coaches, man, practice film is a different animal. They're looking for a lot of different things. And so I feel like it's one of those situations where you really have to diagnose day one day 5, day 10, day 15, is he getting measurably better at each one of those benchmarks? And if he is, maybe he is the guy that ends up at the beginning of the year being the starter.
The third camp battle Ray Fittipaldo highlighted was DeMonte KZ and Keanu Neal for that safety spot that was vacated by Terrell Edmonds. I really love DeMonte KZ on this defense, Paul. I'm excited to see him for a full season after we only got him really down the stretch of last season. His analytics are fantastic. He looks like a really hard hitter. I'm kind of excited to see him in that role, so I don't know how much I want to see Keanu Neal, but how are you looking at that battle in terms of how you'd like it to play out?
I'm with you. I mean, KZ, what I liked about him, he's a guy that shows up. Like when he's in the game, there's going to be 1 or 2 plays where he is out there thumping somebody, where he's making a big hit, where he's making a big stop. He's an impact player. The thing about Terrell Edmonds, and we've talked about this many times, right? He's the kind of guy, if he had been a 3rd or 4th round pick, we'd say, boy, he had a really nice career and this and that. But he was a 1st round pick. And so as a 1st round pick, you want a lot more than what we got from Terrell Edmonds. He was a guy that did the job. He was, he would make plays. He was good enough, but he wasn't an impact player. KZ, to me, looks like the kind of guy that can be an impact player, and make some big, big plays for them. Be the kind of guy who's, guys that are, running backs that are running through the hole, or receivers that are coming across the middle, or kind of have their one eye looking, all right, where's this guy coming from? Because I know I'm about ready to get thumped. Those are the kind those are the kind of players that I like at that position. And I like the fact that, last year he showed that pretty much every time he played, he showed up on film with at least 1 or 2 really high impact plays.
Yeah, I think part of it is, are the Steelers going to do the things up front to free up both of those safeties? I think you could have a very similar conversation with Minkah Fitzpatrick of, we've seen when he has to creep up and run defense, right? He's not as effective at the things that he's supposed to be doing, which is making those impact plays, getting turnovers, leveling some big hits. But when he has to creep up and run defense, he gets worse. I think that's also true for KZ. Is the Steelers have to put him in a position to succeed more than anything, I think, Paul.
Right. That's with everyone, Adam, though. I mean, I think every player just about you could come up with, except for maybe TJ Watt and Cam Hayward, have some deficiencies, right? But I think that at the end of the day, the Steelers have done a pretty good job of that. I honestly think the Steelers' defense last year, they did a really good job of fooling people into thinking they were a really good defense. And a lot of that has to do with schematics. Because I didn't think that, if you look at the individual parts, I thought the sum was better than the individual parts. And I think that's the biggest thing to me. When you look at it from that standpoint, they've done a pretty good job of scheming guys in getting them in position. I mean, hell, they made Robert Spillane. There were people near the end of the year talking about how Robert Spillane, was a key ingredient they needed to re-sign. They made, they survived with, the Devin Bush. They survived, with Terrell Edmonds, who I thought, again, it was just kind of, I didn't think either of their corners were going to ever go to Canton either. So, I mean, at the end of the day, if you look at the individual parts, you're like, boy, why was this defense so good? Well, obviously, having TJ Watt and Cam Hayward and Minkah Fitzpatrick obviously help. A great deal. But beyond that, I think schematically they did a pretty good job of trying to figure out what everyone can do and what they can't do, and tried to really kind of build on that. I think that was evident last year. I think it'll be evident again this year because I think that is a position, the one we're talking about here. I think that is a position where I don't know that it's a one-size-fits-all kind of situation with regards to how you would run your defense.
Any other camp battles that you're looking forward to seeing play out, Paul, when they finally put pads on Latrobe?
Well, I mean, I would say a big one, and I'm surprised Ray didn't talk about it. A big one would be at both of the guard spots, right? I mean, I feel like they maybe I don't know. Maybe I read our sports pages too many times over the winter and saw duplicate articles, but it seems like they've got about 25 guys now for the 2 guard spots, right?
Yeah, no, I mean, Samalo, Herbig, there's been a lot of talk about all these guys. You still have Dotson in the fold. Who are the guys that you like most from that group, Paul?
Well, I'll tell you this much right now. Kevin Dotson, this has to be the year. He's got to either be the guy they think he can be when they drafted him, and his size and his athleticism and all this stuff, he looks the part. This has either got to be the year that he does it or just doesn't do it, right? I'm intrigued by Herbig. I think I like him a lot. And so to me, they've got two guys there that I think if they play well, you have two really good guards. Interestingly enough, another guy that's in the mix probably is Kendall Green, although I see that they have him at backup center right now. I feel like this is going to be an offensive line that once they get the right five people lined up across, I think it's going to be a pretty good offensive line. I know a lot of people last year like to bag on the offensive line. I wrote about it late in the season. And listen, you can say whatever you want to say, but they've gotten better and better and better and better. And so to me, I think that they can build on it. They've got some good pieces. It'll be really interesting to see what happens with Kevin Dotson. That's to me, that's the most intriguing player in this camp. Is he's a guy that they've tried to basically motivate in many different ways. They've benched him quietly. They've openly talked about his weight and maybe all this other stuff, right? But he's also a guy, man, when he's played, he's been a mauler at times. I mean, I think he has a chance to be really good, but this is like make or break for him this camp.
Paul, another person that came up in Ray's chat was Cory Trice, the 7th round pick out of Purdue. A lot of buzz about him. I'll tell you, I like him. I like his analytics from the days at Purdue. I like the length. I like the speed. I think he's a nice package, but I think a lot of people are also getting a little bit out of control. Don't you, Paul?
Well, again, I mean, we do this in Pittsburgh, don't we? Someone new, someone fresh, someone comes up and he's off the radar. They've discovered a diamond in the rough. They're smarter than everybody else. They use some formula that no other team has or whatever. And generally speaking, he's a 7th round pick, and a 7th round pick is just a guy. I say that all the time. And if he becomes just a guy, guess what? That means they got something out of him because it means that he played. If you look at the percentage of 7th round picks that make it, it's very low. Adam, I think he's got upside, like you said. I like some of the things that, I see from him. We've all watched all the clips from him at, Purdue. If you're a draft person, you sit around and watch, okay, here's who the Steelers drafted. Let's go to YouTube and all the other stuff. Let's look at his film. There's a lot to like about him. But he's a 7th round pick, and he's got some deficiencies in his game. And there are some questions about his overall ability to actually play in coverage, man coverage against NFL wide receivers. I would say this: if he's a 2nd round pick, if he's like their 3rd corner, or if he's their slot corner at any point, okay, I could see that. I feel like if he's ever their starting corner, though, I would be very skeptical that they're good enough. Just because I feel like people fall in love with some of these guys. There's plenty of film of him for Purdue. Every single team watched. Every single team passed on him at least 6 times, and many of them passed on him a 7th time. There's reasons for that. So let's pump the brakes. I mean, I get it. And part of it is, Adam, it's early. Then you got training camp time. Then you got this. We all have to write and talk about things, and these are the kinds of things you talk about and write about early in a season like this. But I do not expect him to be an impact player this year, if that's the question.
Oh, absolutely not this season. I kind of look at him as, I think he has upside to maybe be a number 2 in 2-3 years. But that's upside, and a lot of guys never reach their upside, Paul. So, right. Can I squint at him and see a number 2 guy eventually? Yes. Do I think it's the most likely path? Probably not. And I certainly don't think we're going to see the 2023 contributions that some people seem to be expecting now.
No. And I don't think that. And again, I'll be very shocked if he's more than the 3rd corner or maybe the slot guy, even in his career. He's a guy to me that is going to be, if anything, just sort of a solid contributor that they're able to get some things out of from time to time, and maybe in a pinch he fills in, but not much more than that.
Paul, in the time that we have, since we started recording, the Pirates have lost to the Oakland Athletics. They've dropped 2 out of 3 against one of the most historically terrible teams in baseball. At least that's what they're on track for right now. This coming off of, a 6-game winning streak that I think had people starting to think, oh, maybe May was a bit of, an aberration, and maybe they're not nearly as bad as they looked that month. They're probably not as good as they looked in April, but maybe they can be a team that's going to hang around for the long run. Did this series do anything to shake your confidence in that idea, especially because Roansy Contreras, again, looked really bad today? Didn't get out of the early innings. I think they were down 5-0 when he left the game. If he's not on, Paul, if he's not a capable guy, doesn't that not bode well for this team kind of taking this thing to the end of the season, even if they're not, a favorite in the division?
They are kind of who we thought they are, really. I mean, they're you and I have both talked about it. I know, what did I say? 74, 75 wins. I said it at the start, and I still think that. And so at the end of the day, they're going to have stretches where they look good and stretches where they don't look so good. Now, that being said, this is one of the worst series losses that they've had in a long, long time. And really, it's just one of those things where you can't lose to the A's at home. You just can't. You can't lose to the A's at home, and you can't lose to the A's in the fashion they lost. And Adam, the scariest part about it to me is that they could have very easily lost all 3 games. That's the worst part about it. They could have lost all 3 games. The A's were so bad they gave them the first game with walking in 2 runs and error another run. A guy for some reason throws the third when it's Austin Hedges who's tagging up. I mean, if the A's just played, reasonably fundamental baseball, they would have swept this series. So that's a terrible sign for the Pirates. It's brutal to me when you lose in the fashion they did to a team as bad as the A's. And if Roansy Contreras isn't the guy they thought he was, or anything close to that, then this team is going to struggle to win 75 games. Because I know that Mitch Keller is their guy, but you know what? He started to show some cracks recently too. And then you've got Rich Hill, who I can't imagine is still going to be getting guys out in August and September because he's going to be playing for a different team. At the end of the day, if you can't send somebody competent to the mound every single day, you have a hard time winning.
Well, that's how they lost 100 games these last handful of seasons,
right.
Paul. They sent guys out there that weren't ready. And I think it's just a major warning sign for me that Roansy Contreras is not ready. I mean, he after O'Neal Cruz, who, okay, bad luck. He's hurt. You don't get to see what he is. That's not the Pirates' fault. That's just baseball sometimes.
Right.
Contreras was supposed to be that second guy, especially the guy who was on the opening day roster. Maybe you get excited by the end of the season about Henry Davis, maybe Andy Rodriguez. But Contreras was supposed to be the guy who was already here, who was going to take a step, and he's not ready, Paul. I think it's very clear. And how big of a concern is that for the rebuild in the big picture, not just this team here?
He's one of the cornerstone players. He's one of the guys they're supposed to be building around. He's one of the guys that's supposed to be getting it done and supposed to be giving you a lot of hope for the future. If he's not the guy, Adam, Quinn Priester, okay, we keep hearing about him, but for the most part, Contreras is here and supposed to be the guy. He's supposed to be somebody we're saying the next 5 years they've got their number 1 or number 2 guy. That's when they traded for him, when they brought him here, that's what we were told he was going to be. That's what they thought he was going to be. If he isn't that, there's some severe cracks in this quote unquote, rebuild that's supposed to over the next couple of years materialize into something greater in terms of everything else.
Well, and I think it speaks to Paul. Like we talked about this with Tyler Glasnow, right? And that was part of why Neil Huntington got fired. And that is part of why we were supposed to be excited about Ben Cherington, is that the Tyler Glasnow arc was not supposed to happen again. And it pretty much did with Mitch Keller, considering, okay, he looks pretty good now, but it took him how long to get here? Roansy Contreras seems like he's going to take a little bit longer. That doesn't, engender much confidence that, okay, when Quinn Priester does get here, or when Mike Burrows does get here, that they're not going to face the same, strong jump to the big leagues and run into that same wall and need 2 or 3 years to kind of get there because they're not ready. And I think it's just a bad look for the development core.
Absolutely. That is the biggest thing that I would tell you, is that you can keep telling us you've got young players and young prospects and all of this talent coming up. But guess what? If you can't develop them, or if they're not as good as you think they are, eventually you just have a bunch of young guys and that become middle-aged guys who still aren't any good. I've had people that follow baseball say a lot of the guys on this team they have right now are more like just sort of extra throw-in guys. That this team is sort of doing it with smoke and mirrors at this point, and that eventually their lack of starting pitching beyond Mitch Keller and Rich Hill is gonna show up. So this, and then down the road, I just don't think there's as much reason for optimism as some people do. But I could be proven wrong.
I'll get you out of here on this, Paul. Henry Davis got finally called up to AAA. It's June. We're seeing some big prospects get called up. We've talked about Christopher Morel with the Cubs on this show. Ellie De La Cruz was the number 1 prospect, I think, in all of baseball, just called up by the Reds. Kind of feels like we're setting the table here for seeing Endy Rodriguez sooner than later. Is that your read on the situation? Is that the jolt that this team needs? If they're going to get one, that's the jolt they're going to get. Absolutely.
I think it's going to happen. And it's going to happen the day after his service time and all the other stuff magically happens. But they do need it, and I think they understand it. And guess what? If this thing goes sideways for a few more days, they will need a public relations hit. I definitely think that all the writing is on the wall, that they're going to bring him up. And it won't shock me if they bring him up for the Mets series this weekend. But we'll see. I mean, it depends. It's going to be interesting to see how they handle Henry Davis going forward. But at the end of the day, Rodriguez is the guy who's closest to being ready. So they're going to definitely bring him up as sooner rather than later. And if it means that we never have to watch Austin Hedges play again, I'm happy. But it won't, obviously. But I'm just telling you, I can't watch the guy. I know he had a good game the other day. I don't want to hear about it. He can't hit. He's an automatic out. Let's just move on.
I said that was the last one, Paul, but this is a little pet peeve of mine is that we've gone, remember how long did we talk about the designated hitter in bringing it to the National League because we don't want to see pitchers hit. And as soon as that happens, now we're saying, well, it doesn't really matter if a catcher hits at all because he handles the staff well. He's got the 4th best ERA, when pitchers are pitching to him in the National League. Like, he's so great. Are catchers like being now talked about as the new pitchers? And should the Pirates use the designated hitter on Austin Hedges instead of one of the pitchers?
That's just silly. It's silly to me. And quite frankly, Adam, I don't buy it. I've never bought it. Everybody that is a position player should be able to hit.
Yeah, I agree. And it's ridiculous. Well, Paul, I'm going to get you out of here. Thanks for stopping by, and we will be back again next week. Make sure you're subscribed. Check out the North Shore Drive on Friday. Paul, take care.
All right. Thank you so much, buddy.
Thank you for checking out this content from Post-Gazette Sports. If you liked the video, please like it and subscribe to our YouTube channel. If you enjoyed it on Apple Podcasts, please rate us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts. For 6 months of digital access to post-gazette.com for just $6, click the link down in the description.